Шановні колеги, ми продовжуємо робочий день.
Dear colleagues, we continue our working day at Ukraine Crisis Media Center. And now we have presentation of the report of statement for launch of 15th HRMMU report. Ms. Fiona Frazer, head of the monitoring mission of UNO on human rights in Ukraine.
I'm very pleased to be here today to present the 15th report of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights on the human rights situation in Ukraine. This report covers the period from the 16th of May to the 15th of August 2016. Many of the human rights issues and trends highlighted in the report continue to be very relevant today. First, the human cost of the conflict. Since the start of the armed conflict in April 2014 until today, 15th of September 2016, OHCHR has recorded 32,071 casualties, civilians, Ukrainian military, and members of the armed groups. Of these, 9,640 people were killed and 22,431 were injured. We estimate that of those killed, 20% were civilians. As before, this is a conservative estimate based on the available data to us. During the reporting period, that is from the 16th of May to the 15th of August, OHCHR recorded 188 civilian casualties in the conflict zone, 28 killed and 160 injured. This is a 66% increase compared to the previous reporting period that covered from 16th of February to the 15th of May 2016. Of these civilian casualties, over 60% were caused by shelling from various artillery systems in apparent violation of the Minsk agreements. The second half of August, outside the specific reporting period, was characterized by a further increase in civilian casualties, with an additional 11 killed and 53 injured, again, mostly as a result of shelling. While the situation improved since the ceasefire was restored on the 1st of September, the situation along the contact line remains deeply unstable. There has indeed been a decrease in civilian casualties, though. By the 15th of September, we recorded 10 injuries in the conflict zone. This once again proves that only genuine de-escalation of hostilities can prevent the death toll of the conflict from further increasing. As with all others, we call on the implementation of the ceasefire in order for a lasting resolution to this conflict. During the reporting period, hostilities affected medical facilities and hospitals, limiting access to healthcare for patients. For example, our teams on the ground recorded the impact in two particular cases. On the 24th of June of this year, the children's ward of a polyclinic in Birozova Street in Donetsk City was shelled. On the 23rd of July of this year, hospital number 21 in Kuivishevsky district of Donetsk City was fired upon for 2 hours while the hospital was attending to the medical needs of 60 patients. 2 patient rooms and the surgical ward were severely damaged by mortar and automatic rifle fire, seriously affecting the hospital's capacity. As you all know, people continue to be affected by the daily limitations on their freedom of movement as they go back and forth across the contact line. During the reporting period, up to 26,000 to even at times 32,000 people were crossing the contact line on a daily basis. The long queues and risk to their lives remains their biggest concern. People wait for up to 36 hours, including overnight, with no or limited access to shade, latrines, water, medical aid, or shelter in case of shelling. Over the summer, as temperatures exceeded 30 degrees Celsius, some people, mostly elderly, lost consciousness while standing in line. During the reporting period, OHCHR recorded that 3 civilians died at the checkpoints due to delayed emergency medical assistance. Since the end of the reporting period, that is, as of the 15th of August, the numbers crossing have reduced to approximately 25,000 people per day, but it is still a considerable number. So while recognizing the security concerns, we continue to urge the government to revise the temporary order and that all parties to the conflict should facilitate the freedom of movement of civilians across the contact line by creating additional transport corridors, equipping checkpoints with the necessary facilities, simplifying procedures, and allowing access of independent monitors. For those who have fled their homes and are internally displaced, they face serious impediments to their economic and social rights. Equal protection of all people affected by the conflict is crucial for the peaceful rehabilitation of Ukrainian society. We urge the Cabinet of Ministers to de-link IDP registration from all social entitlements not related to the IDP situation, including pensions. We also call on the government to change the recently introduced IDP residence verification system to ensure IDP's right to freedom of movement and free choice of residence, and to also put in place an overall comprehensive strategy that captures the need for durable solutions. Over the last 3 months, OHCHR has noted incremental improvements in access to places of deprivation of liberty. This is a critical development, as over 70% of the cases that we document and were documented over the last 3 months contain allegations of torture, ill treatment, and incommunicado detention. We continue to have regular and unimpeded access to the penitentiary facilities in government-controlled areas, and we noted improvements following certain interventions that we made, such as the provision of medical care and investigations into allegations of human rights violations. We also noted that the Security Service of Ukraine undertook trainings for its personnel on torture prevention. OHCHR has, however, continued to document cases of torture and ill treatment by the government and armed groups, once more underscoring the urgent need for regular access to places of deprivation of liberty, the provision of medical care for victims, and the accountability for documented violations and abuses. OHCHR can independently confirm the release on the 25th of July and 2nd of August of 13 individuals from the Kharkiv SBU facilities who had been subject to enforced disappearances for periods of up to 2 years. During the reporting period, OHCHR was able to meet, in the presence of local authorities, some pre-conflict prisoners held in Penal Colony number 124 in the Donetsk region under the control of the armed groups, as well as 31 men deprived of their liberty in the context of hostilities held in colony number 97 in Makiivka, Donetsk city. The self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic and the self-proclaimed Lugansk People's Republic continued, though, to deny external observers unhindered access to all places of deprivation of liberty, raising concerns that cases of torture and other cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment or punishment may be greater than reported. OHCHR notes the efforts of the Ukrainian authorities to bring perpetrators of human rights violations and abuses in the East to account. Such efforts are a start. We hope that meaningful results will come. Based on the trials that we have monitored to date, our assessments of investigations and analysis of prosecutions, such impunity largely stems from pressure on the judiciary and inability and unwillingness of the Officer of the Prosecutor General and Office of the Military Prosecutor to fully investigate violations and abuses of human rights perpetrated in the context of the armed conflict. Impunity also affects cases of enforced disappearances and of missing persons, which in turn violates the victim's right to truth. In this context, journalists and media workers have played a crucial role in reporting on the daily reality of the conflict and how it affects people's lives in eastern Ukraine and across the country. But we have documented a notable increase in violence and harassments against journalists and a lack of accountability for such assaults. Journalists and media workers have continued to experience pressure from armed groups, the state security services, and the armed forces when reporting on sensitive matters. Some journalists also mention self-censorship when they feel that certain information could harm the Ukrainian armed forces or fear that Russian or armed groups' media could exploit such information for propaganda purposes. The continued campaign of Mirotvorets to publicize the names and contact details of journalists and media workers covering the conflict in armed group-controlled areas has exposed them to harassment and attacks with a clear intent to silence and influence their reporting. I appeal to you today, as journalists covering the human rights situation in Ukraine, to speak out against these assaults and demand answers about ongoing investigations. A free and vibrant media landscape is critical for the development of a democratic society. We know that what limitations on fundamental freedoms, such as the freedom of expression, look like. In the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, we have noted continuous concerns in the human rights situation, with the further administrative integration into the Russian Federation's Southern Federal District of that region in violation of United Nations General Assembly Resolution 68262 on the territorial integrity of Ukraine. The right to peaceful assembly has further been curtailed by the de facto authorities there, and people continue to be interrogated and harassed by law enforcement agents for expressing views that are considered as extremist. A deputy head of the Crimean Tatar Mejlis was ordered by a Crimean court to undergo a psychiatric assessment. He has been released, but we note the damage that such forced hospitalization can cause. The search for missing persons remains inconclusive, and investigations have yielded no results. The absence of accountability and redress for victims nurtures impunity. In this report, we also emphasize what our mission has done to help to improve the human rights situation in Ukraine. In 60% of cases, we provided individual response and action to help ensure protection for victims of human rights violations and abuses, as well as to their families. Our mission stands ready to assist all those who hold human rights obligations in fulfilling their duties. And we have done so through assisting in ensuring that draft legislation is in compliance with international human rights standards, through advising the authorities on their obligations and on protection gaps that come to our attention, and through issuing concrete recommendations and following up with key authorities. Human rights are the principles that keep societies safe. Fair and impartial rule of law is the foundation of public confidence and security. We note and very much welcome the adoption by Parliament of the much-needed constitutional amendments related to the judiciary. They provide a rare opportunity to really break with the past. This chance must not be squandered. The people who live in Ukraine, in any corner and on either side of the contact line, have a right to equal protection under the rule of law, to judicial institutions that are impartial and operate under due process guarantees. I would like to highlight a comment that is being made today on Ukraine by the High Commissioner for Human Rights. He says, "The escalation of hostilities along the contact line over the summer was a sharp reminder that the situation in eastern Ukraine deserves much more attention. Additional efforts are needed to find a lasting solution to this crisis and to put an end to the suffering of the civilian population. Human rights and justice are what people need, not further deaths and more intense hatred and destruction. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Frazer. Do we have any questions? Yes, we do. The question will be in Ukrainian, so please put on the headphone. Будь ласка, лаконічно представляйтесь і ставте питання.
Director of the Institute of Policy and Social Policy, Irina Berezhnaya. Fiona, please, we would like to express our gratitude and to your officers in the release of Mr. Katsaba that was helped by your mission. I would like to ask, so on the 3rd of June, Ivan Shemanovich was present and you were present here, and I asked him to initiate through the Council of Security of UNO to start criminal case against Ukraine on the crimes against humanity. Vasiliets and Timonin, these journalists, they are in prison for 10 months, and Katsaba was for many months in prison, and Odessa is not investigated, and other crimes are not investigated. You represent them in your reports, but Ukrainian power just throw your reports to the bin, and law enforcement bodies just do nothing to do this. So Shemanovich said that he should think about it and to review it and to take a decision, and they promised through your mission to inform us on the decision. And this is the first question, and the next one concerning the not fulfilling of international obligations on the provision of the Supreme Council from 21st of May 2015 that we appealed against, and the decision is not taken by the High Administrative Court of Ukraine until now. And also the provision, this you said in your report from 15th till 15th of February, you said that the question will be decided about the territory where the people are deprived of their human rights, and these are grave violations. But as of today, we have official answer from the Cabinet of Ministers and other committees, and this no government or Supreme Council, they do not take your view into account, and they did not introduce changes into legislation. What are you going to do as mission about the territories? They Severodonetsk, Mariupol, Kramatorsk, maybe we lost our rights even here in Kiev. And so the international law is not implemented in Ukraine, and maybe we are not informed that the government of Ukraine do not implement these norms here. Thank you.
Questions, and maybe just on the second one first. Working on the whole human rights protection, the promotion and protection of human rights, and working with governments to ensure that they meet their obligations is always a long-term journey, if I can put it like that. And we all know that things don't change overnight, but if you can take small incremental steps, then that can actually lead to some change that can have particular impact and longer-term enjoyment of human rights for all. I mean, I think you raise issues of basically what you're looking at is accountability. in both your questions. And as I highlighted, one of the things that we really welcomed from this reporting period was the fact that constitutional amendments on the judiciary have been undertaken, have been put in place now. And now we need to really work with the government and work with all of the judiciary and all those who are there to implement those amendments to ensure that they really do have an impact on the ground for individuals, so that people can seek justice, perpetrators be brought to account, and that there is some accountability. So we will continue with our work to remind the government, all its ministries, agencies at the central, at the regional level, of their obligations. We will identify what are the gaps on the ground and then look with other partners to try to assist the government in implementing what is needed to address these gaps that we have identified. There are a lot of actors here now. So I think we need to continue with the journey, and as a journalist, I think you have an important role also to play, and I think you do play that, in highlighting where you see the needs, and so deep respect to you that you're voicing your concerns, and I would definitely encourage you to continue to do that. We all need to work together to highlight the challenges, but also then to support those who are able to make some change.
Дякую вам. Чи є ще запитання або уточнення? Будь ласка, лаконічно представляйтесь.
Ukraine news. Fiona Frazer, head of monitoring mission. The question to you is, so indices of human development and quality and safety of life in uncontrolled territory. This is Crimea and part of Donetsk Oblast. Tell us, please, are there any international mechanisms, except those the Security Council implemented against aggression and occupation in relation to Donetsk and Lugansk republics, LPR and DPR? So, to provide human rights there, and is there any official response from Russian Federation to the Security Council and your office as to the voting rights of the Ukrainian presidents in the territories that are not under control in Lugansk and Donetsk and Crimea? You know that Crimea was added to Southern Federal District of Russia, and on the constitutional rights of citizens of Ukraine, Crimean Tatars, they are violated. So the question is simple. Are there any official written documents from where they brought to the to your organization? Do you have some written communication?
On what, though? Sorry.
In the territory of Crimea, I'm from Crimea myself, and this is important for me. And in Donetsk and Lugansk Oblast, that is not under control. As I understand, we are the founders of UNO, and we have our rights to provide some recommendations, and UNO also. So, did you get some answers, some response from these territories, some report about the human rights situations in these uncontrolled territories?
So, in territories under the control of armed groups, in so-called the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic and self-proclaimed Lugansk People's Republic, we have an office based in Donetsk. We have a team working there. It's been consistently working there since April 2014. And when we have allegations of violations of international human rights law, violations of international humanitarian law, we are able to go to the so-called authorities there and discuss what our findings are, and as we would to make recommendations. There are people who are in charge of that territory, and just as states are the major players that are the duty bearers for obligations, human rights obligations, but also non-state actors. According to our Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, they also play their role in ensuring and meeting certain human rights obligations. They have also certain obligations because they have control of the territory. So we are working, and we do communicate with the authorities of the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic and the so-called authorities of the self-proclaimed Lugansk People's Republic. With regards to Crimea, I think you know that we do not have any presence there.
Дякую вам. Чи є ще запитання або уточнення? We don't have further questions, so at this point the press conference is finished. Thank you for coming and looking forward to seeing you here in the nearest future. Thank you. Шановні колеги,
Dear colleagues, our next event is at 12.